Back to India Today Global, one of the big stories that we're tracking today is the visit of the Spanish President Pedro Sanchez to India. This is, of course, coming off the back of also another visit from a top European statesman, which is German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, which has just taken place in the last week. So, as we always do when we have a top visit or from a major leader from any part of the world, we're going to explain, the India's relationship with that country, what is expected in the agenda for that particular visit, as well as what some of the takeaways will be for India. So as always, let's look at that relationship with Spain, which is a relationship that India has had since 1956. Something that, of course, Spain in the general conversation about Western European countries gets lost somewhat, because we tend to focus a lot on France, we tend to focus a lot on Germany, we tend to focus a lot on the United Kingdom, but Spain gets lost in the middle somewhere. But in fact, India's relationship with Spain remains particularly strong. It's a country with which we have a trade relationship that almost touches $10 billion. We also have a large Indian diaspora that lives in Spain, somewhere around 75,000 people. And it is a relationship that is all the more important because Spain actually happens to be a fairly powerful economy within the European Union. It's had its troubles over the last couple of decades, but really it remains a major European economy, along with some other major European economies like France, Germany, the United Kingdom. In fact, Spain has a GDP that's almost $2 trillion with some very, very peculiar and interesting strengths, particularly in defense, which we'll get into. So now we have this visit by the President of Spain, Pedro Sanchez. Of course, this is the first visit by the President of Spain to India in about 2 decades. India's Prime Minister, of course, Narendra Modi, went to Spain in 2017. We also had a visit some time ago from the King of Spain, Juan Carlos I. And so there is a established diplomatic relationship. There is an established relationship on things like trade, but you don't really hear the two countries working together extremely closely on key issues. But that may be changing a little bit. You may have heard of Spain being mentioned more and more in India's conversation, and that is particularly because of the issue of defense. The big story today, of course, coming from the Spanish President's visit to India, is that President Sanchez and Prime Minister Modi inaugurated a private facility for the manufacture of C-295 aircraft. These are transport aircraft. Just a couple of years ago, the Indian Air Force had signed a deal with Airbus Spain. Airbus, of course, being the global Air Force aerospace major, which manufactures the C-295 transport aircraft. The Indian government, the Indian Air Force, had signed a deal with Airbus Spain to buy these C-295 transport aircraft, but also to manufacture these at home. And Airbus now has partnered up with Tata and is setting up a final assembly line, an FAL, in Vadodara in Gujarat, and that is exactly what has been inaugurated today by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Pedro Sanchez. In fact, it's the first such private line that has been established by a private Indian defense player, which is Tata in this case. So absolutely big news for the Indian aerospace industry. In fact, lots of conversation about what a monumental step this is in terms of India moving towards manufacturing aircraft for its own use at home. So this deal that has been undertaken with Airbus as well as between Tata has been a major topic of conversation. The deal was signed in 2021. It is a 22,000 crore agreement, so a very, very massive agreement. The idea is, of course, for 56 C-295 transport aircraft to be provided. India's transport aircraft fleet, which in many cases was the Avro 748s, that is those are planes that are rapidly aging, and so now the Indian government has decided to bring in these transport aircraft. But of course, it also wants to manufacture these at home. So the deal was that 16 of the C-295 aircraft would be fully assembled and delivered from Spain, and the rest of the 40, so 56 aircraft, 16 from Spain, and the remaining 40 would be manufactured here in India. So absolutely a big deal for this to have happened. India has already taken possession of some of the C-295. Happened last year, if my memory serves me correctly, and now, of course, this inauguration of this final assembly line. So absolutely a big development, and there's actually more coming in terms of defense. One of the big pieces of news that you've heard in the last couple of days is Navantia, the Spanish firm which has bid for an Indian contract to build air independent propulsion submarines. This is a long story, but if I could put it to you in a very short manner, it is that India has had for the longest time this plan to build more submarines for its of course for its naval defense, as well as for sea control in the water surrounding the Indian subcontinent. That those plans have not been working out extremely well, but now the Indian government wants to build 6 air-independent propulsion submarines. Basically, we have, of course, conventional submarines, and air-independent propulsion submarines are just said to be faster. They're also said to be able to submerge themselves underwater for longer periods of time than you would be able to with a conventional submarine. So it has enhanced capabilities, and that is a capability that India would very much like. Now, India has been entertaining for some time 2 bids to build 6 air-independent AIP, that's AIP engines, 6 AIP technology submarines, and of course one bid is from Germany, and you have Germany and ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems, which teamed up with Mazagon Docks Limited, which is another Indian defense firm. So TKMS from Germany as well as MDL from India teamed up to put together one bid, and Navantia from Spain has teamed up as well with Larsen and Toubro to put together another bid for the Indian Navy. So it's really been between these two. And so, as I mentioned to you, that we have had the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in town just a little while back. You can be sure that he brought up this very important TKMS deal that Germany is lobbying for. Remember that when it comes to these massive defense agreements, oftentimes governments have to give it a push. Governments also try to get something over the line, because remember, when you're talking about defense, you're talking about a very, very sensitive strategic level cooperation, and so governments oftentimes give their support to companies because you want your companies to cooperate with the countries you see as a strategic partner, not as a strategic rival. And of course, so you have the German Chancellor coming in here, of course, I'm sure pushing for the bid from his country, and of course we've also had the President of Spain, and you can be very, very sure that he's also going to push for Navantia and Larsen & Toubro to be awarded this contract. And of course, the big issue is which company will be able to provide the air-independent propulsion (AIP) technology that the Indian submarines need and that the Indian Navy needs. At this point in time, of course, what we know is that field trials are taking place for these 2 submarines. There is a lot of reporting that's happened, but of course, now it seems from some reporting that we're seeing from people who cover the defense beat extremely closely, it seems in fact that the German bid is likely to be the one that the Indian Navy recommends to the Ministry of Defense, which means that the Spanish firm Navantia has lost out. But regardless, it reflects, even if that is correct, it reflects that Spanish defense firms are much, much more interested in talking about bidding for more Indian defense contracts, having an advanced presence here, as well as working on a lot of these things. Airbus Spain is interested in working much more closely with Indian defense firms. I myself last year had the opportunity to sit down and interview some senior Spanish executives, particularly with Navantia. Navantia was saying that they were interested not only in this contract, but also for other transport vessels that the Indian landing docks, that the Indian Navy would require, and they were eyeing some contracts in that regard. So another major thing to look out for is the further development of that relationship with Spain on defense, because Spain in fact happens to be a major player in the European defense ecosystem, and so that building closer strategic partnerships with Spanish firms in this regard will open up some opportunities and allow India to work more closely with what is a very, very major player in the European defense ecosystem. So that is really the big takeaway that you're going to look at, that I would advise you to look at, which is the C-295 final assembly line, which has been inaugurated, as well as what we're seeing now with this Navantia bid. Of course, there are also going to be pushes to expand bilateral trade. We also understand that the president is going to address trade and industry leaders. He's also going to be meeting with think tanks, including the Observer Research Foundation. That's also going to be happening. And there you have that relationship between India and Spain, focusing in this visit at least largely on the trade relationship, but also very interestingly on this idea of whether more can be done on the defense side of the relationship. We've already seen this monumental C-295 aircraft deal, 22,000 crore deal that will augment India's aircraft transport fleet. Of course, also some interest now in bidding for some contracts with the Indian Navy. We'll keep you absolutely updated on this story, but I just wanted to give you a brief sense of why the Spanish president is here, why we saw the German chancellor come in just a couple of weeks ago. Both of them really chasing for closer trade ties with India, more investment, as well as a closer defense relationship. So in some ways, the two leaders, these two European statesmen coming to India, wanting many of the same things. And in fact, at least in this case of the submarine deal, really eyeing for the same contract from the Indian Navy. But that's all I have for you right now.